ash glaze for my tree. Pretty cool.
What's up, everybody? Today we're going to be making a glaze from this beautiful, enormous tree in my backyard, and I'm so excited to do it. One of the things I'm trying to do with my pots is make them as natural as possible, use as many local materials as possible. And I live in Florida, and I bought this house. One of the reasons why I bought this house is because it had this beautiful camphor tree here. If you didn't know, camphor is the ingredient that's in Vicks Vapor Rub that makes it incredibly aromatic and gives it that healing, calming, soothing smell. And every time you mow the lawn, you get all the little sticks and twigs and stuff that fall off this tree, and it's just a beautiful aromatic smell that comes off that lawnmower. And I just love this tree so much. It's been just a joy to have in my backyard. It shades the backyard, it cools everything down by several degrees. I just love this tree, and I want to integrate it into my artwork. And every year we have hurricanes, and it drops a whole bunch of sticks. And I have a big pile of sticks and limbs and things that fell off during the hurricane. And we're going to turn the ashes from that into a glaze. What better way to celebrate the nature and the beauty of Florida than not only being inspired by the materials, but actually using the materials and having the materials be part of the artwork. I can't wait, but the first thing we're going to need to do is have a fire. So let's get to burning some of these sticks and some of these twigs and making some ash from this beautiful tree and turning it into a glaze that reflects the beauty and the nature that surrounds me every day. If you're gonna try this, you definitely want a high quality respirator. This stuff is nasty to breathe. And when you're touching the ash, it's very caustic, so get some high quality rubber gloves that aren't going to get damaged by the ash. It's very caustic and it does hurt. I'm just running it through a very simple screen. I'm using a 60 mesh here, but just the screen from the dollar store works great. A lot of times I'll start with the dollar store screen and then go to the 60 mesh and just get rid of that other chunky stuff. All right, after all that sifting, we got all of our ash right there in the little bag. You can see it didn't make much. This is about maybe 2.5 hours of just burning small sticks and limbs. And we got about the Ziploc bag's gonna weigh a couple grams. So we got about 350 grams of camphor ash, which is nowhere near enough to make a glaze, but it's a good start. So we need to have a couple more nice evenings by the fire. Man, it was so beautiful though last night. So this is a glaze made out of the memories of a nice fire, drinking some tea, enjoying the stars. Beautiful night right here. We need a little bit more, but 350 grams will get us started. All right, now before we go mixing anything, we need to come up with a recipe. And I have a 100% favorite ash glaze recipe. But recipes are just kind of starting spots, right? Because every ash is different. But this pot right here, I made this quite a while ago, but this is my favorite ash glaze recipe right here. And I want to tell you a little bit about it and where it comes from and a few other things about the ash glaze recipe. But first, it's a cone 10 recipe. So cone 10 is not going to work at cone 6. I know from experience that cone 10 glaze that I'm going to show you the recipe for, it works better even at a cone 11, cone 12. So it gets better the hotter it goes. So we need to lower the temperature of that. And my friends and I, we talk about ash glazes all the time, and we just call them by numbers. Like we just call them by the recipe. We all know all the recipes, and we trade these around, and so we call them by the number. And this particular recipe right here is my favorite. We call it 40-40-17-3. All right, and those numbers mean 40% ash, 40% potash feldspar, 17% ball clay, and 3% red art. And the red art is what gives it its color. It gives it that green color because the red art has iron in it and it turns it into like a Celadon glaze. Now, another really popular one that a lot of people use and my friends and I use is 40-40-20. And that's the same glaze without the red art, but it has a little less color to it. And I just want to tell you really briefly where I got this recipe. When I was a young potter, there was a potter that lived one town over in Colfax, Wisconsin that I used to go visit all the time. And he was so generous with his time and his advice, and he would give me all kinds of recipes. And his name is Willem Gebbin. And so sadly, this is my last Willem Gebbin, you know me, and I broke it right on New Year's Eve. It's always like, it's always such a struggle. Do you want to use your favorite pots around the house? And every once in a while you're going to break one. And this is my last Gavin, you know me. So if you know where to get one, I checked the internet. I couldn't find any. There was a couple of his pots at Northern Clay Center in Minneapolis, but they didn't have any you know me's. I just absolutely loved them all. I had a bunch of them, but I've broken them all over the years, and that was my last one. I have like 5 of these plates. But anyway, so he was telling me one day about his ash glaze. I was asking about it. Where did you get the recipe and so forth? And he told me, he's like, oh, it's called 40-40-17-3. It's got 3% red art in it, gives it a nice color. And then he was telling me how he got the recipe from another potter in England, whose name is Richard Batterham. And I bought this pot like, I don't know, 20 years ago from Richard Batterham. And it's just a beautiful ash glaze color, just incredible, just a remarkable pot. And I just cherish this one. I definitely don't use this one anymore. I used to use it all the time, but Richard is since then passed, and yeah, I don't know where to get another one of these, and I cherish this bowl. I've been, even like 30 some years ago when I was learning pots, there was a book that had a couple of his pots in. I was just in awe of how beautiful they were. So definitely don't want to break that pot. Maybe every once in a while I do use it, but very rarely. But anyway, that's where I got the recipe 40-40-17-3 from. I just love how it was passed from one person to another person to another person, and now I get to pass it on to you. So if you haven't tried an ash glaze yet, and you fired a cone 10, give 40-40-17-3 a rip. It's remarkably beautiful. It's incredible. But for firing a cone 6, it's not going to work. So glazes, if you didn't know, have like kind of 3 basic parts. They have a glass former, which is like the silica, which makes it shiny, right? And there's no actually silica in the glaze, but it's in the materials of the glaze. So there's silica in the clay, there's silica in the ash, and there's silica in the flux. Okay, so we have our glass former, which is in kind of all 3 of the ingredients. And then our next ingredient is the flux, what makes it melt. And in this case, it's the ash, which is a pretty decent flux, and the feldspar. And I'm using Custer feldspar, which doesn't really exist anymore, but I have a ton of it, so I'm just gonna use it all up. It's just a potash feldspar. Okay, so that's a flux. That's like the gas pedal, as John Britt would say. And then we have the alumina portion, which is just the clay, right? It's kind of the brakes. And that keeps it from flowing off the pot. That's really the difference between glass and glaze. Glass does not have clay in it. So if you put glass in your cider pot, it would just run off. But the clay helps keep it on the pot. It kind of like acts as brakes for the glaze, so it doesn't just whoosh, run off the pot. So we need to adjust the glaze so it melts more at a lower temperature. So I'm going to take that 40% of feldspar, the big portion of flux. I want to keep the ash the same because that's what gives it the ash glaze, right? If you take that out, then it's not really an ash glaze anymore. So I'm going to take that 40% of Custer feldspar and split it in half. So we're going to use 20% Custer feldspar, and then I'm going to try using Gersley borate, which is a low temperature flux, using a lot of low temperature glazes. And it's kind of a natural material, and I'm going to try that. And I'm also going to try a separate test of Frit 3134, which is a really common low fire flux, and see which one works the best to lower the glaze temperature. Now, like I said before, this is just a starting point. I have no idea if this is going to work or not. It really depends on the ash, really, because it's a natural material. Every time you get ash, it's going to be different. And this is ash right here. So I have 3 different ashes right here. This is 1 night of fire pit, 2 nights of fire pit, right? They're going to be different. So I can mix them all together, and I have a fire pit full right now. And this right here is from my charcoal grill. So this is going to be a different source of ash. So they're all going to look different. So I'm going to do 1 test with the camphor ash that you saw me making, and then 1 test with the charcoal ash from my charcoal grill. And it's Kingsford in the blue bag, by the way. That's what I used to cook on my grill with. And so it makes a lot of ash. So that's going to be our recipe. We're going to do 1 test with the 40-40-17-3 with 20% Gersley borate. And then we're going to do another test with the 20% Frit 3134. And I'm also going to test a recipe that I found in this book. I'm not going to publish it because I don't want to violate John Britt's copyright. But if you don't already have this book, like, what are you doing? It's amazing. It's just an incredible book. And John Britt's such a great guy. It's called It's called The Complete Guide to Mid-Range Glazes Super comprehensive book. If you fire cone 6 and you want to make your own glazes, if you're just curious about making your own glazes, this is a must buy. Yes, you can find glazes online, like places like Glaze, but this just goes into deep explanation of why you would want to choose different materials and so forth. It's got firing schedules in it. Very comprehensive guide, amazing recipes in here. I've used a bunch of them. Anyway, I'm gonna try one out of this book. It's called Honey Yellow. You can find it. I don't know which page it is, but you can look in the index. And it's mostly red art and ash. And it's got a little bit of Guernsey borate in it, I think. So that's basically what it is. I think it's, yeah, pretty close to that. So we're gonna test that out. So I mixed up about 6 different variations here. Got some different test tiles. We're just gonna mix it up and test them out. I mixed these last night and had a chance for the water to soak into the clay and everything like that, just soak up everything. We're gonna mix it up with the immersion blender and just dip it. This is gonna be like a very just initial impression of the ash and the ash glaze, because ashes are always different. I like this, really like this chart right here. This is in Robert Tacane's book, Ash Glazes. I'm using mostly branches in this glaze. And you can see how different the composition is of the branches. For example, potassium or potash, and the trunk would be like 45% of the trunk, but in the branches only 8%. And lime is a very small portion in the trunk usually, but in the branches it's much higher. And so you just never know what you're going to get. Well, let's check silica here. So silica is pretty similar, a little bit less silica in the branches, which is actually kind of surprising because the leaves have so much. But so don't quite know what we're going to get. And look at how low the bark is. So we got a lot of bark because it's branches. So this is going to be a lot different than probably the last ash I used. And I did also test it with the charcoal ash too. So I'm assuming that's going to be more like trunk. But who knows? So that's why you just got to test it out. And so I made about 6 different versions, and this is just the initial, and then we'll go back and change it. So let's grab one of these and test it out. Okay, so this is with the charcoal and the 3134 as the frit, or as the flux there. So it's sat all night, but you can still see there's chunks in there, but it should be soaked up. I'm just gonna grab the immersion blender and buzz that up real quick. Now you can't tell, but this smells amazing. I love the smell of ash glaze. It's got just that very alkali smell to it. So you can see there's some ash on the side of the container here, and it's a little bit thick anyway, so I'm just going to use my sprayer to get that off of the walls. Sometimes I'll also use a paintbrush too, but I worry that and too much is getting locked up in the paintbrush. But all right, I'm pretty satisfied with the consistency of that and the thickness, so we're going to give her a rip here. We're just going to label a tile. So this was the 3134. All right. Go ahead and just give that a little dip. Again, this is just trying to get the initial, like, is this a good glaze? So usually what I'll do a quick dip, give it a shake. So that's a thin coat on that top portion. And then I'll go back and just do a half coat on the top there to get a thick one. There's a bunch of carbon visible in there, like little chunks of charcoal. So my guess is that even though this went on kind of thick, it's going to need to go on thicker just because a lot of that's organic material that's going to burn out. So I go ahead and do like a 2-second dip on the top. 1, 2. Give it a little nice little shake. So pretty nice and thick at the top. Hopefully that'll look good. I'm going to go ahead and dip the rest of them, and then we're going to put them in the kiln. Well, we got the results here from the first little test firing and got some interesting results. And I think it makes sense with what we talked about earlier with the branches. So these two right here are using the tree ash. And again, this is mostly from the branches, which have low potassium and low sodium. So they're not loaded with a whole bunch of flux. And a lot of the flux is like a calcium flux in the branches, according to the book, which would make sense why it didn't quite get fired all the way. You can see there's some bubbles in the glaze. So it didn't quite flux out all the way. So I think what I'm going to do is make a line blend where I add more frit to this just to get it a little bit more fluxed out. Kind of like the surface on this one. So this one right here is the Gersley borate added to it. I'll do a line blend adding more, and this is the Frit one. Okay, and then I got these two. These are with the charcoal ash, and I'm pretty pumped about these. So that would make sense because charcoal is supposed to be from more like the trunk of the tree. That's why these are quite a bit more fluxed out, and they look pretty good. They obviously, both of these need to be screened, and this one, I think those red spots in there are iron or steel from the grate, the fire grate. So I probably need to put a magnet in there and get that out. But this one has some little chunks in it, so I can just run it through a screen and get those little chunks out. But overall, pretty nice melted surface. It didn't run at all, which I like. So this tells me that if I put this like in the salt kiln and it got maybe to cone 7, it might run a little bit. But if it was still in the back of the kiln, maybe it only got to cone 5. This is pretty well fluxed out. So I think that this would, even at cone 5, be nice and melted. So give us a good range of possibilities. Now, the color on this, we're not testing for the color. I'm just purely testing if it's going to melt. Obviously, in the little Vevor kiln, it cools down very fast. I actually pulled these out with a raku tong. So you're going to get a much different surface on this. But the melt looks really good. I'm pretty pumped up about. So this is the honey yellow, which I believe is 50% ash, 40% red art, and then 10% either a Frit or a Gersley borate. I can't remember, but now you can see these little spots in here. So this is starting to rivulet. And when you get a high ash content glaze, a lot of times they rivulet or where they start to pull together. And I'm not a huge fan of that for my pots. So I don't know how much that would rivulet. I'd like to see that on a larger surface. Maybe I can spray it on a pot and see what it looks like on a full pot. But I'm guessing the color would be really nice on this. This is the same glaze right here. These two are the same exact glaze, just different ash. And you can see one is completely melted and one still has big bubbles where the glaze hasn't melted all the way. Pretty interesting how just the change in different wood ash just such a different result. That's why you can't really rely on a recipe for an ash glaze because all ashes are different. But I kind of like that this one, because it's charcoal ash, you know, this is something I'm just going to get from cooking my food anyway. And it's kind of a more industrial product, so hopefully it'll be similar. So every time I cook out, I can just save the ashes and then replenish this. I really only have about 1.5 pounds of glaze. And you need to have, this is crazy, to make 5 pounds, or about enough to make a full bucket of glaze, of ash. To make 5 pounds of ash, you need to burn a 1/4 cord of wood, which is like 2 foot by 2 foot by 4 feet of wood. And that's a whole lot of wood. I'm not going to burn that in a whole year in my backyard, right? That'd be a whole lot of branches to come down. You know, we'd have to have a pretty big hurricane, knock on wood. That won't happen. I did end up making a full small bucket of this honey yellow glaze. And I ran a neodymium magnet through it. And it's insane how much metal was in that from the grate on my fire pit. I did this like 3 times and just got several ounces of metal out of that glaze bucket. So definitely do that. Now, life was kind of a whirlwind for a couple weeks, and I didn't have time to film everything, but I did make a small bucket of the honey yellow and of the regular camphor ash, and I tested it on my electric kiln, and I really liked the melt of it. I thought it was just kind of perfect, so I glazed a few pots with it and loaded up that salt kiln for the first firing with some of this ash glaze. And boy, was that the right decision or what? Now, most of these pots that I'm going to show you are from the salt firing. They're all from the salt firing, but several of them have been refired. And I refired them because I put them all on the top shelf, thinking the top shelf would be the hottest and it would look the best. Where it ended up being the bottom shelf of the kiln, because the first firing, the top shelf was way hotter and all the pots looked the best on the top shelf. So I put these all on the top shelf, and it ended up being the bottom shelf got way hotter and all the pots looked the best on the bottom shelf. So these are on the top. So I did refire some of these. This one was not refired. This is just how it came out of the kiln. And you can see how it got started to get some of these fat, juicy drips. I did some finger swipes here, and it's getting some of those fat, juicy drips on there. It definitely could use a little bit more flux and get fired a little hotter. Still not 100% happy with it. You can see it's got quite a bit of iron marks from my fire, from my grill. This is I believe this is the honey yellow glaze, the one that's mostly red art, as is this one. And this is on Laguna number 40 stoneware, which is sort of it's like a medium, I wouldn't call it a buff, but it's slightly darker than a buff colored stoneware. And this one is clearly the iron yellow glaze. You can see it's rivuletting heavily. And it could definitely use some more flux, but it's still pretty good looking. Overall, it's nice and smooth, but it does have a lot of these iron spots in there, so I need to run the magnet through it one more time. Now, these 3 pots right here are B-mix. So this is the camphor ash one. Actually, these 4 pots. This is my favorite one out of the firing, for sure, with the ash glaze. So this is the camphor ash. That was 40% ash, 20% Gerstley borate, 20% Custer feldspar, and then it had 15 ball clay and 5 red art. And this, you can see this is on B-Mix. It has just a beautiful color, just starting to drip. So it could still use a little bit more flux to it, but we're starting to get into something that looks pretty good. You can see it does have some iron spotting on it. I'm thinking that maybe if I put these in a ball mill, that would do 2 things. 1, it would get rid of those iron spots. And then 2, they just have a little chunkiness to them. There's a few little things that you can see that maybe some unburnt ash or something in there. Got a few little chunks on there. So I think putting them in a ball mill, I don't actually have one, so I'd have to make one. Definitely not going to buy one. Have you ever priced those things out? They're outrageous. So this is the camphor ash on the B-Mix. I don't think I actually have one of the camphor ash on the stoneware. And this is the honey yellow on the B-Mix. This does have a flashing slip applied to the bottom part. And you see it's kind of a darker color. I'm honestly way more into this. This is kind of my style right here. And I think that looks really good. And just needs a little bit more flux. This was refired in the electric kiln to cone 6. It only got to like cone 4 in the salt kiln, as was this one. And then we got this one on the inside right here. And over this black underglaze, I think that looks pretty handsome over the black underglaze with the finger swipes in there. That is also the camphor ash. So pretty happy with the results. Just going to add some more flux to both of them. I think they could just run a little bit more and get a little bit more juice to them, if you will. Oh, it's starting to get some juice there, though, on that finger swipe. And maybe ball mill them. So that'll be up. I think I'm going to do a line blend where I just add more Gerstley borate and take out the Custer and see what looks the best. So yeah, so I really couldn't be more pleased with the results just for your first time, but it definitely needs more flux. We need to get these to run more. So I'm going to go ahead and do some more tests coming up for the next firing. And but the color's pretty dang nice. That's a nice looking cup right there. So thanks for watching, and I appreciate all of your enthusiasm, all the likes, all the comments. It really keeps me going. You guys are the best people ever. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.